I've been testing cookie recipes for months now. Different ratios, butters, chill times, and honestly, I've made way too many cookies. But only 3 are truly worth making. Let me show you how to make them. Quick thing before we start, I'm not ranking these based off of trends or what looks the best on Instagram. I'm ranking these based off of flavor, texture, and how forgiving they are if you're not a pro baker. So this list is great even if you've never baked a cookie in your life or you've made 100+ cookies in your lifespan. We're gonna start with the third one, the sugar cookie. We're gonna start with a stick of softened room temperature butter, and we're gonna add 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar. Using a hand or stand mixer, we're gonna start on low and gradually raise the speed, beating the butter and sugar until it's well combined and lighter in color. This process is known as creaming. It incorporates air into the dough and makes sure there is no lumps of sugar, creating a more tender and airy cookie instead of a rock hard and dense one. Once the butter and sugar looks like this, we're gonna crack in a room temperature egg, as well as 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. Give that a good mix until the egg and vanilla are incorporated and the mixture looks light and fluffy like this. In a separate bowl, we're gonna mix together 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/4 teaspoon of fine sea salt, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. Give that a good whisk to make sure everything's evenly distributed, and then we're gonna dump half of the mix in with our wet ingredients. Also, make sure to mix in the dry ingredients on low so you don't get flour everywhere. Right as soon as the flour is barely visible, we're gonna scrape down the sides and add in the rest of our flour. We're gonna stop mixing right as soon as the flour is no longer visible and looks like this. To get the dough off the mixer, I like to lift it off the bottom of the bowl a bit and blast it on high like this. Works every time. Unlike the other cookies on this list, you don't have to chill the dough before baking. Using a cookie scooper, we're gonna stack 2 scoops of dough on top of each other and slightly press them in so they stick together. This is the trick to getting those bakery style cookies where the edges are nice and crispy but the inside is still soft and chewy. This trick is especially great when making sugar cookies as the dough tends to spread out a bunch. If you don't have a cookie scooper, each stack weighs about 40 grams or 2 large tablespoons worth. I know some people like a really sweet sugar cookie. If that's you, you can coat some of the dough in some granulated sugar before baking, but I like them just as they are. Now we're gonna bake these at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 minutes. Once they're out of the oven, the edges should look slightly golden and the center should look slightly under. This is exactly what we want. Let them cool in that hot sheet pan for 5 minutes to finish cooking, and then we're gonna place them on a wire rack to finish cooling off. While those cool, we're gonna make a super simple frosting by combining 1/2 cup of powdered sugar with 2 teaspoons of milk. Mine is a little too thick, so I'm gonna add 1 more teaspoon of milk to thin it out. If yours is a little too thin, you can add a bit more powdered sugar until it looks just like this. To make it easier to frost the cookies, I'm gonna place the icing into a sealable bag and snip the end off just like this. Now the fun part. At this point you can decorate the cookies however you like, but I'm just gonna do a simple zigzag pattern. I like to place a paper towel underneath the cookies while icing them to make cleanup super easy, especially if you're decorating with kids. These really surprise me because they look simple, but they taste great. Most sugar cookies are either dry, flat, or way too sugary. You know, the ones that you get at the store, and they look really pretty, but they taste kind of bad. These definitely knock those out of the park. Not only that, they're really buttery and nice and chewy in the center and have a nice crispy edge, and the icing is not too much. These rank number 3 because they're not super flashy, but they're a nice, reliable sugar cookie, especially if you have family members that are really picky or kids that don't really like too fancy of ingredients. These are your to-go reliable sugar cookie. But if you're somebody who likes a cookie that's a little bit more interesting, the next one is where things get good. If you've never baked with miso before, this cookie will change your mind. I know what you're thinking, miso in a cookie? Isn't that in soup at Japanese restaurants? Well, yes it is, but don't worry, it's not gonna make the cookies taste like soup. It adds an umami depth that regular cookies just don't have, giving it a sort of sweet and salty type of vibe. We're gonna start by creaming a stick of butter with 1/4 cup of granulated sugar and 3/4 of a cup of light brown sugar. Once the butter and sugars are well incorporated and look like this, we're going to add in 1 room temperature egg, as well as 3 tablespoons of white miso and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. I like to use white miso because it's a lot more mild and sweeter than the darker varieties. Then we're going to beat this until the mixture is lighter in color and looks airy. Once it looks light and airy like this, we're going to combine 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour with a teaspoon of baking soda and 1/3 of a teaspoon of fine sea salt. Give that a good whisk, and then we're going to add in half of the dry mix with the wet ingredients. Mix on low, and just when the flour is no longer visible, add in the rest of the dry ingredients. With the dry ingredients incorporated, scrape down the sides and give it one last quick mix to get any last bits of flour. Once the dough looks like this, we're going to add in 1 cup of white chocolate chips. I like to use a spatula to fold in the chips to avoid overmixing the dough. The white chocolate works perfectly here because it's sweet and creamy and it balances out that umami from the miso. You're basically adding salty umami to balance out the rich sweetness. It's the same idea as adding salt to caramel or adding flaky sea salt to chocolate chip cookies. It just adds that extra touch that makes you stop and think. Now that our dough is finished, we're going to transfer it to a smaller bowl and cover it so that we can let it rest in the fridge for at least an hour or overnight if possible. After the dough has had a chance to rest, we're going to scoop out 2 dough balls and place them stacked on a baking sheet. Then we're going to roll the stacks into a single large bowl. This dough barely spreads, especially if you let it rest overnight, so we're going to press them down to about ½ an inch in thickness. With all the cookies prepped, we're going to bake them at 350 for about 13 minutes. You want them golden on the edges, but still soft in the middle. Just like the sugar cookies, we're going to let them cool on a hot sheet pan for 5 minutes before transferring them into a wire rack to finish cooling off. The miso white chocolate chip cookies are my favorite out of the 3 flavor combinations. Oh yeah. You get that buttery cookie base, the sweetness from the white chocolate, and that slight savoriness from the miso that really brings it all together. I rank this one second because it's not the most familiar flavor with most people, but once you try it, it's hard to go back to a regular cookie. This is the one that I often get the most requests for the recipe. And look, I almost put this next one at number 2, but I've been developing this final cookie recipe since my culinary school days. If I could only bake one cookie for the rest of my life, it'd definitely be this one. We're starting by browning a stick of butter on medium-low heat. I like to stir the butter every now and then to prevent the milk solids from sticking to the bottom of the pan. Also, I developed this recipe in grams because it's a lot more accurate, but I'll have the cups and tablespoon conversions down in the recipe below. The butter is going to foam up and then the milk solids at the bottom will start browning. Once it looks like a deep caramel color and smells like roasting nuts, it's time to take it off the stove. Make sure to take it off the heat quickly as it'll go from brown to burnt really quick. Place it into a wide heat-proof container and we're going to cool it down to room temp. To speed it up, you can place it into the fridge, but remember we want the butter at room temperature when we go to cream it with the sugars. Once the butter has cooled down to room temperature and looks like this, we're going to cream it together with 84 grams of granulated sugar and 84 grams of light brown sugar. Browning the butter removes the moisture from the butter, which would usually lead to a super crispy cookie instead of a crispy and chewy one. To fix that, we're going to add back in the moisture we removed by adding in 20 grams of cooled coffee. This reintroduces the moisture back into the dough, and the coffee taste improves the chocolate flavor later on, so it's a win-win situation. Once the creamed mixture looks like this, we're going to add in 1 room temperature egg and a ½ teaspoon of vanilla. After beating for about a minute, the dough should look super light and fluffy just like this. Now we're going to combine 168 grams of all-purpose flour with 2 grams of fine sea salt and 2 grams of baking soda. Give that a good whisk to make sure everything's evenly distributed, and then we're going to dump half of the mix in with our wet ingredients. Then we're going to add in the rest of the dry ingredients and stir until no more flour is visible. Then we're going to roughly chop 160 grams of German sweet chocolate, also known as a 48% cacao bar. Don't go too crazy chopping the chocolate into small pieces. We want some larger chunks so that it melts throughout the entire cookie. Once your chocolate looks like this, it's ready to add to the cookie dough. We're going to scrape down the sides of our bowl and we're going to add in the 160 grams of chopped chocolate as well as 50 grams of semi-sweet chocolate chips. We're going to briefly use our hand mixer to mix in the chocolate just until it's well incorporated. This is easier than using a spatula to get those bigger chunks in there. For the chocolate, I'm using chips and chunks because I like the bigger and smaller pieces you get throughout the cookie. Once the dough looks like this, we're going to transfer it to a smaller bowl and cover it up. We're going to let this rest in the fridge for at least an hour or overnight for the best results. Now that the dough has had a chance to chill, we're going to scoop out 2 dough balls and place them stacked on a baking sheet just like we did with the sugar cookies. Slightly press them together so that they stick, and remember, if you don't have a cookie scoop, each stack is around 40 grams in weight or exactly 2 large tablespoon worths. Now we're going to bake them at 350 for 13 minutes. Just like the other cookies, we're going to pull these when the edges are golden brown but the center still looks slightly underdone. They'll keep cooking on the pan after you take them out. Let them cool on that hot pan for 5 more minutes and then we're going to transfer them onto a wire rack to finish cooling off. Lastly, this is what I think a chocolate chip cookie should look and taste like. The reason why it's the winner is because it has such a deep, complex flavor and it tastes absolutely amazing. It really brings you back to your nostalgic roots eating some chocolate chip cookies with some milk, but it just tastes so good. Also, a pro tip is you want to add a little bit of flaky salt right on top to just give it a little bit. Just because I use the sweeter chocolate, some people like to use semi-sweet or bittersweet, but I use German sweet, which is about 48% cocoa, so it's going to be a little bit more on the sweeter side. For that reason, I like to add just a little bit of flaky salt right on top. Let's crack it open and give it a taste. Oh yeah, you can see the chocolate throughout the entire cookie. Let's give it a try. Oh yeah, dude. This one wins literally every time. Like, who doesn't like a chocolate chip cookie? And it's not too much chocolate. There's spots without the chocolate. Because I don't like a chocolate chip cookie that's just full of chocolate. I still like little parts where it's just cookie.
And this is perfect. That little bit of flaky sea salt right on top really brings it to another level. If there's one cookie you guys should make out of all three of these, I definitely recommend making this brown butter chocolate chip cookie. After all that testing, these are the 3 cookies that are actually worth your time. Sugar cookies for when you want that nostalgic but reliable cookie, miso white chocolate chip if you want something unique, sweet, and slightly savory, and brown butter chocolate chip for the ultimate nostalgic cookie. Recipe for all 3 cookies are down in the description below, and honestly, if you're only gonna try one cookie, I recommend you give it a shot to the brown butter chocolate chip cookie. If you got a favorite cookie recipe or one that you want me to try, drop it down in the comments below. I'm always looking for new recipes to try out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace! Oh wow. Dude, these are like so good. God dang. Like what? These are delicious. Okay, peace.